of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Please be seated.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, and welcome to a very special event celebrating our inspirational Violet Oakley murals here in our Pennsylvania Capitol. I'm Justice Deborah Todd, and on behalf of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, I'm so pleased that all of you are here with us this evening. Chief Justice Tom Saylor and my colleagues who are present this evening, Justice Kevin Dougherty, Justice David Wecht, Justice Sally Updike Mundy, join me in welcoming you to our Capitol courtroom. Let me thank the Pennsylvania Cable Network for broadcasting this event. PCN is responsible for airing all of our Pennsylvania Supreme Court oral argument sessions, along with the en banc sessions of the Commonwealth Court and the Superior Court. And we very much appreciate their facilitating our educational and outreach efforts. To our viewers on PCN, I hope that you will enjoy this program as much as we will, and that you will take the opportunity to visit Harrisburg and come to our beautiful state capitol to view the Violet Oakley murals in all their glory. Let me also thank the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts and our court staff, particularly Amy Couchner, Rhonda Campbell, and Nikki DePasquale, for all of their fine work in planning this program. We have many special guests here with us, and let me introduce some of them. Some of them will actually be coming in as the program moves along because our legislature is still in session and we needed to proceed with our program. Let me welcome the Commonwealth Court judges who are here with us: President Judge Mary Hannah Leavitt, President Judge Emeritus Bonnie Briggins Ledbetter, and Judges Patricia McCullough, Ann Covey, Julia Harthway, Joe Cosgrove, Senior Judge James Gardner Collins, and Senior Judge Rochelle Friedman. From our common pleas courts in the area, let me welcome York County judges Penny Blackwell, Michael Bortner, Maria Musty Cook, Christy Fawcett, Kathleen Prendergrast, Richard Wren, and Andrea Marseca Strong. Dauphin County judges Lori Saratelli, William Tully, and Janine Turgeon. Lancaster County judges Leonard Brown and Mike Shawley, and Cumberland County Judge Albert Maslin. I also would like to welcome Judge David Barton of the Court of Judicial Discipline, State Court Administrator Tom Darr, and Supreme Court Executive Director Gary Shovlin. We have with us tonight many members of the Governor's Cabinet, and I'm so pleased that you all could join us. First, we have the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Pedro Cortez. We have Secretary of Labor and Industry, Kathy Mandarino, Secretary of Aging, Teresa Osborne, Secretary of Drug and Alcohol Programs, Gary Tennis. Executive Director of the Historical Museum Commission is also here with us, Mr. Jim Vaughn. We have the Senate Majority Leader who will be joining us, Senator Jay Costa, along with Senator John Eichelberger, Scott Hutchison, Patricia Vance, Sean Wiley. And you will be hearing, of course, from Senator Gordner. We are expecting, when their session breaks, shortly I hope, State Representatives Brian Barbin, Tom Catalgerone, Becky Corbin, Jim Cox, Mary Jo Daly, Margot Davidson, Chris Dush, Robert Freeman, John Lawrence, John Mayer, Sandra Major, Robert Matzey, Todd Nesbitt, Mike O'Brien, David Parker, Kristen Phillips Hill, Kathy Rapp, James Roebuck, Rick Saccone, and Will Tallman. So I thank you all. If I've missed some of the elected officials, I'm sure someone will tell me throughout the evening and I can make that up to you. Thank you for being here. Violet Oakley was a woman of incredible talent and vision. The Capitol Murals project was the largest commission ever awarded to an American woman. Remarkably, Violet Oakley, a young Philadelphia artist, was 29 years old at the time of the commission. She was selected for this daunting assignment at a time when women could neither vote nor hold elective office. Ultimately, she devoted 25 years of her life, from 1902 to 1927, to painting 43 murals in our Pennsylvania Capitol. Violet Oakley went on to become one of the most respected artists in America. In 1906, the Philadelphia Press wrote, "This great achievement will grow every year that it is seen and studied. In it, there has been depicted what is unquestionably rare in modern art, a genuine spiritual conviction." Over the past 17 years, I have had the privilege of sitting on the bench in this majestic courtroom. What a treasure this confluence of history and art provides to the people of our Commonwealth. I trust that none who work here take this gift for granted. While there are many things that our three branches of government may disagree on from time to time, I know that our judiciary, along with our legislature and executive branches, all agree that we have been blessed with the privilege of serving our Commonwealth, and that our lives are enriched by the beauty of these inspirational murals in our magnificent Capitol. So let us begin our celebration of Violet Oakley and the Capitol Murals. At this time, I will introduce our speakers as well as our featured lecturer. We are honored to have as our first speaker Senator John Gordner, the chairman of the Pennsylvania Capitol Preservation Committee. Senator Gordner has served in the state Senate since 2004, and he represents the 27th Senatorial District, which includes Columbia, Northumberland, Montour, and Snyder counties, as well as parts of Luzerne County. Prior to his election to the Senate, he served for 11 years in the House of Representatives. Senator Gordner is currently the Majority Whip and, among other things, serves as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Gordner was to be followed by House Speaker Mike Turzai, who hails from my home area, north of the city of Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, Speaker Turzai is tied up in legislative session, but he has informed us that he yields his time to Senator Gordner. Both Senator Gordner and Speaker Turzai share my appreciation of art and history, an appreciation that is also shared deeply by our Chief Justice, Tom Saylor. And we are so grateful that they, along with all of you, have graciously agreed to be here to take part in this program. Following these introductory remarks by Senator Gordner, we will welcome our featured lecturer, Dr. Andy Masich. Dr. Masich is president and CEO of the Senator John Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. He is also a former chairman of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. Dr. Masich is himself a Pennsylvania treasure. He is known internationally for his dynamic history presentations, his Emmy-winning historical documentaries, and his award-winning books on American Indians, the Civil War, and sports history. Having heard Dr. Masich lecture several times in the past, I can assure those in the courtroom, as well as our television viewers, that you are in for a real treat. Finally, to close our program, we will hear from Attorney Sarah Austin of York County, who is president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association. The PBA was kind enough to sponsor this evening's reception, And as always, we appreciate the PBA's support of our court's initiatives. I would also like to express our court's appreciation to Sharon Lopez, President-elect of the PBA, and the PBA Executive Director, Barry Simpson. And now, let us begin our program with remarks from Senator Gordner.
Well, good evening. Welcome to your state capitol. Justice Todd, thank you for your interest in this and your enthusiasm for it. I should mention, I think I got a call from Justice Todd with my son playing disc golf at one of our state parks in northeastern Pennsylvania. And it took us, I think we went out and off with our cell phone coverage, but her enthusiasm and her desire to have this event was unquestioned, so I'm glad that it has come to this fruition. Thank you so much. And welcome again to your state capitol. I serve as chair of the Capitol Preservation Committee. This committee was established in 1982. Back with our nation's bicentennial in 1976, there was this sort of groundswelling of desire around the country and in our state to take a look at our historic buildings and make sure that we do something with them. And we had two titans in the House of Representatives. The one was Matthew Ryan, the longest serving member and the longest serving speaker in the House of Representatives. And he came together with a gentleman by the name of K. Leroy Irvis, who was the first African-American speaker of any House or Senate in this country, and he served here. So those two gentlemen, one a Democrat, one a Republican, got together, had such a love of this building that they decided that they would put together this Capitol Preservation Committee in order to begin to do the work to make this building look like it originally looked like back in 1906. So it was formed. The first two projects by the Capitol Preservation Committee involved the restoration of the Civil War battle flags. They had grown into disrepair, but had been sitting in some rooms, and so that ended up becoming the first undertaking of the Capitol Preservation Committee. And the second was the scaffolding, restoration, and preservation of the main rotunda murals in the interior dome spaces. Once those were successfully completed, they began with the murals that you see around the main rotunda. And that began and was done basically over a 15-year period. And then after that, they began with the Supreme Court chambers, as well as the House chambers and the Senate chambers. Former Representative Kathy Mandarino and I were in the House. Kathy, if you remember, we got kicked out of the House chambers. We went downstairs and had a session at bingo tables, if I recall, or they certainly looked like bingo tables, so that they could go ahead and do the work to restore the House and Senate chambers. In 1991, the committee undertook the restoration of our beautiful Barnard statue groups at the main entrance. If you come in the main entrance of the Capitol, you see that beautiful statuary. And it was first worked on in 1991. Those statues were removed, taken apart, cleaned, fixed, put back together, and replaced as to where they are now. In 1990s, we began by going really through the Capitol floor by floor, doing the restoration as well as the safety upgrades, doing the HVAC, mechanical, and all those sorts of things. When Kathy and I came together in 1992, without exaggeration, if you went into most offices, you would have seen drop ceilings. You would have seen fluorescent lights in those drop ceilings, and the beautiful ceilings were covered by those drop ceilings and fluorescent lights. I still remember when the original scaffolding went down in the main rotunda, they did half of it at a time. And when the first half came down, you saw the white marble, and the part that they did not do, you saw the orange marble. Because for 80 some years you could smoke, whether it was cigarettes or cigars or whatever. And after 80-some years, it had made that orange tint. And it was so unbelievable when that scaffolding come down and you could see the results of the work. Back in 1997, he removed the statue from atop the dome. There's a trivia question if you know what the statue's name is on top. It is, in fact, Commonwealth is the name of the statue. But for those of us that were here, a helicopter actually lifted Commonwealth from atop the dome, took her away for a while, and they regilded, restored, and then brought her back on a Sky Crane helicopter and returned her to the dome in 1998. In 2003, the restoration of the Governor's Grand Reception Room was done and made into its current beautiful state. And again, a trivia question, there is one building, I guess I should finish that story. The 100th anniversary of this Capitol building was 2006. And really, as things got going in the 90s, that 2006 date was clear on everyone's mind to get it done. And in fact, everything that needed to be done was done by 2006, except there is still one room or suite of rooms that has not been done. And we have not been able to convince a governor to leave his office and his sets of rooms for about a year. But that is the only room and sets of rooms that are left to be done in this beautiful Capitol building. We continue now basically to make sure that we preserve, and we've now truly gotten to the definition of preserve this great history and this great building. I will, in coming to the conclusion of my remarks, this Capitol building is often known as a palace of art. Palace of art. And I think if you take the time to go through it, you could not disagree with me. And it goes from the Violet Oakley paintings to the other statuary in the front of the building to the other paintings in the House chambers and the Senate chambers. And actually our biggest piece of artwork is the flooring on the first floor. The Henry Chapman Mercer Moravian tile that goes from one end to the other. And there are 375 mosaics there that if you check it out. I still remember my daughter and her friend came down in 8th grade for a day as part of their class. And at some point we had downtime, and I decided I needed a half hour to have them do something, so I had them find the cardinal. Now, I started them at the House end of the Capitol, knowing that the cardinal was at the Senate end. It took 15 minutes or something like that, but there are 375 mosaics. We have 200 historic clocks, one of them which I think are in the back of this building. And if you ever get to my office, please stop by. In my office are 2 original 1906 club chairs that are there, along with a settee from the Hills Capitol that burned to the ground in 1897. There were a few items that were saved, and the settee is one of them. And we used to keep them up on the 5th floor, and I brought them down the 1st floor so I can make sure that I can show them off. I'll make one shameless promotion. I see Al Maslin. Kathy, he was with us as well, so Judge, glad to see you again. I'll make one selfless promotion. The Capitol Preservation Committee has a number of awesome items that are available. One of them is this book that was done, I believe, in 2003, just before our 100th anniversary. It is all about Violet Oakley, and it's called A Sacred Challenge because that was her words for what her project was. She considered her multi-decade project a sacred challenge. And this book gets into the background as well as all of the artwork. So, Justice Todd, thank you so much for highlighting this tremendous woman. I do remember, my last story, is Catherine Baker Knoll, our first female lieutenant governor. If you get to go in the lieutenant governor's suite, I would encourage you to do that. But in the lieutenant governor's suite is, and it is preserved, the women's waiting room. And it still looks like a women's waiting room, because back in 1906, when women came, they were not allowed to interfere with the business that men were doing at that time. So they waited in the women's waiting room. And Catherine Baker Knoll, our first female lieutenant governor, loved to take people to the women's waiting room, and then she said, "Now I will take you to my office, the lieutenant governor's one." And what a great statement that made. And again, the work that Violet Oakley done as the first major work that any female artist was commissioned to do is tremendous. And thank you for shining a spotlight on it. Enjoy the evening.
I am so pleased that House Speaker Turzai has broken away from legislative session. I had previously announced that because you were unable to be here, you had yielded your time to Senator Gordner, but he has agreed to yield it back to you.
First of all, Justice Deborah Todd, thank you so much for your kind invitation to be a part of this outstanding event that you have here today, honoring the works of Violet Oakley. And as many of you know, Justice Todd and I are both from out west, and our homes are very close to each other. She in southern Butler County, myself in northern Allegheny County. And I must tell you, you are just an outstanding jurist, and for you to invite our body through my representation here as Speaker of the House, we are exceptionally honored, the entire body, for being able to partake here in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court chambers. I want to say this, that this Capitol, it is so wonderful, and I was listening to Senator Gordner's knowledge, really, of the artwork in this Capitol in his role as head of the commission. And if you have an opportunity to get to the House of Representatives, we do not, unfortunately, have any Violet Oakley's works there, specifically that you see here in the Supreme Court and in the Senate. But everybody still makes mention of the fact as to how just beautiful this Capitol is, and how much Violet Oakley's works really state the case for the beauty of the Capitol. In the early 20th century, architect Joseph Houston envisioned the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, as Senator Gordner said, a palace of art. And these murals throughout the Capitol building are certainly the manifestations of this vision. She spent over a quarter of a century, from age 28 to 53, creating 43 murals for this building. And I'm sure Andy Masich, a good friend, will be providing you much about that. But here's the thing that I think, just the one point that I think those of us in the House would like to focus on, in addition to the outstanding beauty of the art and her vision in the art. But it's my understanding she was inspired by William Penn, and was resolute in her determination to depict Pennsylvania's history of religious tolerance and ideas of social freedom and justice. This is a point I often make in the House of Representatives, because I think it ties to Violet Oakley's vision. You know, William Penn came over in 1682. 1682, he founded Penn's Woods. And one of his, after, you know, obviously negotiating a treaty, which he did not need to in some ways, you know, he could have just immediately acted as if, you know, he could just take over Pennsylvania, but he negotiated a treaty with the Delaware Indians. The other thing that Penn did is he established the Provincial Assembly, which the General Assembly, both the Senate and the House, are direct descendants of. There was a Speaker of the House in the Provincial Assembly beginning in 1682. Pennsylvania's legislature, now the Senate came along in 1791, by the way. They were a little late to the game. But no disrespect. But the fact of the matter is Pennsylvania's representative democracy precedes the United States Constitution by over 100 years. And Penn, I know we all know this, but I can't get over how many young people do not know this. Penn, as a Quaker, was discriminated against in Great Britain, and came here with the idea of founding this great colony and later state on that notion of religious tolerance. No city in the colonies had as many more diversity than the city of Philadelphia did, because of that culture of tolerance that William Penn created. And Violet Oakley certainly was able to really bring that together in her murals in this outstanding capital. With that, I just want to thank you so much for letting me be a part of this outstanding ceremony. I'm looking forward to hearing at least some of Andy's work, but we are still on the House floor, and I apologize. I will step out after a few moments and then try to be back here in the Supreme Court. But I can't thank you enough, Justice Todd, for inviting me to partake in this today. Thank you.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm Andy Masich, and I'm a former chairman of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, but I have a day job too, and that's at the Senator John Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's one of the largest history museums in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're pretty proud of our history on the other side of the Alleghenies too. Tonight, however, we are here to talk about Violet Oakley. And Violet Oakley was destined to be a painter. She came from a family of artists. Her grandfathers on both sides were painters. Her mother was a painter. Her mother actually did this watercolor of young Violet when Violet was only 6 years old. Violet was born in 1874. She grew up recognizing that she was going to have to get a job because her father, a man of business in Brooklyn, suffered in the panic of 1893, one of the great recessions that hit our country. And Violet had to go to work. She didn't have the benefit of a great education. It was thought that she was going to have to kind of make it on her own. Her two sisters, Nellie and Hester, died at young ages from diphtheria and from typhoid fever. These sorts of diseases ran rampant through our cities in Philadelphia and elsewhere. Tainted water, communicable diseases, poor medicine. Young Violet sought solace in religion. At first, she turned to her Anglican religion, the religion in which she had been raised, but then she discovered the Friends, the Quakers. And then, as her father lay dying in 1900, she turned to Christian Science. Christian Science in 1900 was considered by many in her own family to be a dangerous cult. And they tried to dissuade young Violet from pursuing this course. But she saw in Christian Science a way of healing and a primitive Christianity, as she called it, that a Christianity in which miracles could still happen. And she was desperate, and she turned to that primitive Christianity and to Christian Science. She was about 5 feet 6 inches tall. She was very frail as a child. She suffered from asthma. And that's one of the reasons she didn't go on with her schooling. They thought she was too sickly to attend schools with other people. But this little giant painted the most remarkable murals in the country. And I should say that in 1876, Pennsylvania celebrated the nation's centennial. 1876, there was a big fair in Philadelphia. And they built a woman's pavilion, a woman's building, and they cast about trying to find a woman to design it. They couldn't find a woman architect in 1876. Then they looked for an artist who could adorn it on the inside, and they couldn't find a woman artist that the men thought was up to the job. So men built the woman's pavilion and decorated it with paintings. In 1893, the nation celebrated 400 years of Christopher Columbus. It was the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and that was a big deal. The Americans wanted to outdo the French, who had had a big World's Fair in 1889. They built the Eiffel Tower, for Pete's sake. How are the Americans going to beat that? So they had to go to Pittsburgh. Jim, they went to Pittsburgh, and they found a guy named Ferris to build them this gigantic wheel. It was almost as big as the Eiffel Tower, but it had railroad cars on it. Each gondola was as big as a railroad car, held 60 people, and it revolved. 2,000 people could go around all at once. H.J. Heinz had pyramids of ketchup. Westinghouse, George Westinghouse, illuminated the fair with electric lights. And they built the biggest women's pavilion you could imagine. This time, they found some women artists. Mary Cassatt was one of them, one of the great Impressionist painters of that era, of any era. And Mary Cassatt did murals of the modern woman. Another woman artist did the primitive woman. Now, young Violet was too young, too inexperienced to be there in 1893, but she took note of those women pioneers who were the first mural artists. And she vowed that she would one day follow in their footsteps. And she did learn. She learned from some of the best mural painters in the country, and she learned from Howard Pyle, the nation's favorite illustrator. Every magazine, women's magazines, men's magazines, adventure magazines, had the work of Howard Pyle in it. And Violet studied with him. He was a Quaker, and she learned a lot. Well, she found the companionship of women preferable to any of the men that she could find. She never married. She hung with a bunch of women artists, first at the Red Rose Inn, and then at a place they called Cogsley near Philadelphia. Cogsley stood for, it was an acronym for the names of the women in the group. Cousins, Oakley, Green, and Smith. And here they are. That's Olive to the left as she's looking at us. And she's enjoying her life in this sort of communal studio. And that's where she was when Joseph Houston, the architect of this Capitol, came to her in 1902 and said, "I'd like you to do some of the murals." Now, not the biggest murals, not the greatest murals, not the biggest contract. Those went, of course, to a man. Edwin Abbey got the contract to do the whole Capitol, rotunda, both chambers, House and Senate, and this room too. And little Violet got the governor's reception room. That's what she was allowed to do. This is her monogram, by the way. You see that's an oak tree. See those acorns? And down at the base of the tree, almost in the roots, you see a little violet, Violet Oakley. And look for her monogram in some of her paintings. So she got the contract to do the governor's reception room, 14 panels, 134 feet, 6 feet tall, and she determined, without the permission of the boys, to do the story of William Penn and religious tolerance. The curious thing is, none of her paintings, none of the 14 paintings are set in Pennsylvania or even in the New World. They're all in England or on the sea. That's where she saw the foundation of America. So that's what she depicted. And here we see her showing, these are in the governor's reception room, this triptych. On the left, you see the arrest of William Penn for heresy and for preaching Quakerism. He was a follower of Fox, the founder of the Quaker movement. And over here, he's writing in prison. Here, see the beefeaters around as he's sentenced in the Tower of London to prison in Newgate. So these are the types of images Violet painted. But then she tells us that Penn gets the charter. The king wants to get rid of him anyway. He's kind of out there, and he's all about religious tolerance, so let's send him to America. And they give him a charter, and here's William Penn, his first sight of Pennsylvania. See, we're looking back across the Atlantic. We're looking east as he looks west to Pennsylvania. So that's where her murals end. Well, she took no end of criticism from the boys. The men said, wait a second, none of those murals even deal with Pennsylvania, and your charge was to deal with the founding and romance of the state. They threw romance in there. They figured she's a woman. She knows about romance. And so she said, no, but the foundation of this country is in England. Well, to his credit, Samuel Pennypacker, the governor, stuck up for her. He was a Quaker. And he liked the William Penn story, but he took some hits over this. At that time, there was great rancor in our society among religious groups, Protestants and Catholics primarily. And the Catholic Historical Society of America came to Governor Pennypacker and demanded the removal of all of Violet's murals in the governor's reception room. They said that they showed Catholics in a bad light. It dealt with the hazing of heretics. It dealt with the burning of books at Oxford. And it dealt with the arrest of Penn and his mentor Fox. And Pennypacker said, look, these are all historical events. They really happened. She got it right. So back off, guys. And then the art critics came out and they said, you know what? What we had called Houston's folly, hiring a woman artist, he knew what he was doing, because these are good. They're really good. And that's when Violet's reputation really started to soar. Now, at this time, her father has died. She has turned to Christian Science to deal with her own infirmity. Remember, she had asthma as a child. She was very frail. They didn't even want to send her to school. She was just too weak. Well, when she dedicated her life to Christian Science and she started praying toward the seat of the affliction, not the symptoms of her illnesses, but she tried to find the origins, the things that were making her sick. And by prayer and divine guidance, she got healthy. She got really healthy, robust. She was a ball of energy. She got her first commissions. And then in 1911, Edwin Abbey, the guy who had gotten the big contract to do the whole Capitol, the $100,000 plus contract, the largest one ever in history, Joseph Houston, the architect of the Capitol, went to Violet and said, "Hey kid, do you think you could take on the rest of the contract? Edwin Abbey has just died of cancer in London." Well, she said this is a sacred challenge, and she was up to it. And the first thing she did is she went to Abbey's assistants and said, "Show me his designs and his sketches. Maybe I should pick up where he left off," because he had already done the House of Representatives, where Mike Terzai is headed right now. And he had done a terrific job. You know that one that shows the men at Valley Forge being trained by von Steuben, who's drilling the men at Valley Forge. They're terrific paintings. But Violet needed to make her own mark. And she was actually relieved to find that Abbey left no plans. She even wrote to his widow and said, "Did he leave anything around the house that I might look at to see what he had in mind for these important chambers, the Senate and the Supreme Court?" The widow had nothing. The widow Abbey. So Violet knew, that she was unhampered, and she set her own course. Her paintings are somewhat didactic. They're bookish. And she started with one from Quaker legend, she called it. And it's the legend of the latch string. I don't know if you can see this. I won't spend too much time on it because it's a little bit hard to see. But what's happening here is, here's a settler and his wife. There's their door. There's the latch string hanging out. My grandmother would always say, "The latch string is always out," meaning my door is always open. You can come anytime. In those days, to open a cabin door, there was a bolt or a timber that fit in an iron notch, and to open it, you pulled the latch string out the front door, and it lifted that bolt. At night, you would normally pull the latch string in, so unwanted guests couldn't get in your house. Indians were raiding up and down the Susquehanna. The countryside was ablaze. It was the French and Indian War in the 1750s and 60s. And many, many people died. Indian people, Anglo settlers. But some of the settlers were spared. They were Quakers. And they left their latch strings out. So when the Indians came, they said, "I'm trusting in Providence to protect me. I'm going to leave my latch string out, as we would for any neighbors, and do as you will." And here we see the settler here with his arms folded, unarmed, and the Indians have come into the house, and then all of a sudden this angel appears. See her putting her hands out, and the Indians look at the settlers and back out the door and leave to go someplace else. And so that's the legend of the latch string. Trust in the Lord and keep your latch string out, invite all, and treat them as neighbors. Just so you know that 5,000 women and children were captured by American Indian people, Hurons and Shawnees and Lenape people in the 1750s and 60s. In 1764, 5,000 of them were repatriated. According to the Peace of Paris in 1763, the French allied Indians had to return all of the captives. But that just gives you a sense of how big a war this was, the First World War, as Winston Churchill called the French and Indian War. Well, the other legend that she did in the Senate chamber was the ransoming of the slaves. And this is a story of a Quaker man who took all of his money and bought a whole ship full of slaves that had just come into port, gave them, the slavers, all his gold, and then released everyone on the ship. The legend of the ransomed slaves. And then she went around the room, that great Senate chamber, and she depicted Washington riding into Philadelphia on his way to Brandywine. And notice the troops behind him. They're carrying branches. Those aren't laurel wreaths or laurel branches. They're carrying branches to hide their nakedness and the fact that they don't have uniforms. They're embarrassed. So she depicts them carrying branches besides their brown bess muskets. And then she got to George Washington. She loved George Washington almost as much as William Penn. And she depicts Washington statue-like there in Philadelphia in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention. And here he is looking regal, and there's Benjamin Franklin down in the front. See, crusty old Franklin. And he used to watch George Washington. Everyone thought him the marble man. No one would go up to Washington. Franklin would actually pay them if they would do this. Go up to him and slap him on the back and say, "How you doing, George?" Nobody would do that, because one time it actually happened, and George just kind of looked at that hand on his shoulder and looked down at the man who just shrunk into the shadows. There was something about Washington, aloof and regal and important. But Franklin knew that he had feet of clay, and Franklin told the other men about the chair that he sat on. See the chair with the rising sun on it? That's what it actually looks like in Independence Hall. And Franklin would say, "Is that a rising sun or is that a setting sun? I can't tell." And the jury's still out on this new country we're trying to form here. And then during those interminable meetings, Deborah, I know you've had some like this. There are flies buzzing around, it's hot, everybody's nodding off, and Washington was prone to this as well. And you know, he had those choppers, those artificial teeth. This is actually a pair of his, and they're carved from elk teeth and some slave teeth inserted into a pewter matrix. There are coil springs at the hinge points. I don't know if you can see it, but there are these little coiled springs. So they're sprung in the open position. Someone has actually put some twine on these to keep them closed. So that's how they stayed in his mouth. He had to bite down just to keep his mouth closed and to keep his dentures in. But during those long meetings at Independence Hall, Washington would be nodding off. His head would go back, and Franklin would nudge the other guys around him and say, "Now watch, wait for it, wait for it." And Washington would go. His mouth would pop open when those springs kicked in, and he lost muscle control. So Franklin knew he had feet of clay, but Violet Oakley, she overlooked that. This is George Gordon Meade, 1863, Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the Civil War. And that's the theme of all of these Senate murals, it's the creation and preservation of democracy and of this country, of the Union. And Abraham Lincoln, she used Lincoln's words here and said, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated to the unfinished work." And she wanted all of those senators to see that. The unfinished work, she put in all caps. We've still got a lot to do. It's not over. And then she really started getting excited about this theme of unity, and she portrayed the armies of the world attacking together in unison the unified nations. She said that these dictators, these armies from around the world all want one thing. They all want unity, but they want to take it by storm. They don't want to take it by working together as neighbors. They want to attack and capture it. And so she depicted those armies of the world. You should know, though, that Japanese rising sun there in 1943, a senator passed or introduced a motion for every senator seated there to pitch in $1 so they would hire a painter to paint out that Japanese flag. It was 1943 during World War II. The motion didn't carry, and we still see it there today. On the other side of the dais, we see the slave drivers driving the slaves of the world. Greed and fear and ignorance are the men with the whips. And then her greatest piece was right in the middle. It was unity. And here we see Violet, diminutive Violet, with unity. And she's blue. She's the Madonna. Her arms are spread out. You see the water. Her robes actually her diaphanous robes turn into water, and they're the waters that will cleanse the world and bring all the peoples of the world together. Violet Oakley, this is 1911 to 1917. And in 1917, when they unveiled this wonderful thing, they had a huge celebration. The governor came out, and he was to pull a cord that would release the drape that covered this mural. And when it came time, remember it's 1917, just as the United States was about to enter World War I, the governor pulled the cord, and nothing happened. And the staff all panicked. And then a janitor who had a 40-foot ladder was called for. He came in, put up the ladder right over this mural, and climbed 40 feet up in the air, crawled along this small cornice. I can't believe a human being could do it, but he loosened the drape. It fell with a thud, and Violet turned to the governor and said, "Maybe the world isn't yet ready for unity." And that was the name of her work, Unity. All right, now we get to this building. This room, this chamber, was her last project from 1917 to 1927. And it's here that she really gave free rein to her feelings and her belief that it's only law combined with wisdom and love that can save the world. And these are much more didactic and even a little bit pedantic when you look at them. There are a lot more words in this chamber than any of the other chambers. And here she starts with the Book of Law. That's what she called this. She imagined this was one big scroll unrolled here. And she said, that's the beginning point. That's the Alpha and Omega here. And if you look at that, maybe you can see it on this a little bit better, but there are words in there. Those aren't just designs, those angels of divine law. They're really covering a giant L. See that L right there? That big orange L. And then there's a big A and a big W. Law. And then there are other words hidden in there. Wisdom and love. And this starts with divine law. And then she comes up with this scale of law. It's not a scale in terms of weights and measures. It's a scale, a musical scale. And she sees this as harmony, bringing divine law, the law of nature, revealed law, law of reason, common law, law of nations, international law, and then divine law again. Divine law, it starts and ends with divine law. She continued around and she said, this is the law of nature. This is people in their natural state. They're happy. You see, they're playing instruments and they're eating, they're celebrating. In the state of nature, people are happy, but it doesn't last. And law is revealed to them. And here we see Themis, the Titaness, a Titan goddess, who, I don't know if you know this, but Themis had an affair with Zeus. They had a child named Justitia, Justice. And Justitia is the one who holds the scales and the double-edged sword, and she wears a blindfold. So that's Themis's daughter by Zeus. But here we see Themis whispering in the king's ear. Can you see that? Maybe I better switch to this one. There's Themis there at the top, whispering in the king's ear. Themis was the prophetess who oversaw the oracles at Delphi. And then we get to revealed Hebraic law. Here's the Mosaic Decalogue, they called it, the 10 Commandments. Those 10 Commandments were a foundation for many of the other laws that followed. So there's Moses hewing in stone with the lightning of God inspiring him. And then the Beatitudes here in the corner is also revealed law, but it's revealed to Jesus Christ. And those 8 blessings that he revealed with the Sermon on the Mount are depicted in that mural. And then the law of reason, Justinian law, the codification of Roman law is depicted here. In the middle, we see William Blackstone. Every lawyer in this audience knows who William Blackstone is. He is one of the greatest jurists and judges in history, and he wrote the commentaries. Those are the documents on either side of those columns, the commentaries, which it is said the commentaries are the only thing that's more important to American institutions is the Bible. The commentaries are a foundation of common law. And then as we go around, we see William Penn. Here, I'll make it easy for those of you. There's Blackstone, but there's William Penn. And you see he's got a lineup of people behind him, a big V of people behind him. And there's everyone there who ever might have inspired William Penn, from Dante to Sir Thomas More, and the great Quaker Fox is there. And yet there are people there whom William Penn inspired. And among them is Woodrow Wilson, right back, I don't know if you can see him, he's way back there in the doorway. And behind him is Violet Oakley's self-portrait. She's holding her book of the law. If you can look closer later, you'll see Violet. That's the only painting in which she's inserted herself. And she actually published the book of law. I think this is a copy of it in this pedestal here under the vitrine. And it is this, her proudest achievement was the creation of this book of law that tells the history and inserts William Penn in the story. And then the law of nations. Here we see the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania. These justices, as Mike Terzai pointed out, this body here was created 100 years before the United States Constitution, and Violet saw the Pennsylvania legislature and the court here as really the foundation of American law. And then she goes around and talks about the law of nations with the Supreme Court of the United States. And there's Justice John Marshall, one of the greatest of the Chief Justices, the fourth Chief Justice. And there he is in his splendor before the U.S. Capitol. And then international law. She spent time going to The Hague. She believed in the League of Nations. She was one of the first thinkers about a body that would, if not rule the world, provide justice in the world, like the United Nations does today. She didn't know about the United Nations when she painted this, but she imagined it, and she lived to see it in 1945. And then she's ending here. Over here we see Jesus Christ walking on water and disarming the world. That was her mission, she believed. Through these paintings show how wisdom and unity and light can allow the nations of the world to see and stop the violence and disarm. Remember, this is 1927. As she put the final touches on that painting, she saw the ghost of William Penn. She wrote about this later. It was very moving. As the men lifted up the painting and she looked at her empty studio, she saw this apparition. It was a gray-clad man who looked her directly in the eye and then took off his hat, doffed his hat, and bowed low to her. And she said, "I'm sure, I know he was thanking me for bringing his ideals to life in images that would inspire people, that would inspire legislators and justices and the people of this Commonwealth." She believed that she had a sacred challenge. And then we get back to the final piece, the Alpha and Omega, which is the beginning point for the Book of Law and this series of 16 paintings. Well, that spirit, that last piece there before you get to the Alpha and Omega, is the spirit of the law. And this is where she talks about running through all countries, down through the ages, purified by wisdom, meet in the sea of light, divine law. And I think that's a fitting place to end Violet's story, but I wanted you to know that she lived to the age of 87. She saw much of the world. Remember, when she was born, the nation wasn't even 100 years old. She was born in 1874. We celebrated our centennial in 1876. These people that she depicts are not that far from her own generation. She knew men of the Civil War, of the War of 1812. She knew that their fathers fought in the Revolution. She felt a kinship and a connection to those people. And when she was buried beside her father in Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery, she had that epitaph put on her grave. Violet Oakley, 1874 to 1961. Death cannot kill what never dies. That's the epitaph there. Death cannot kill what never dies. Those are William Penn's words. He wrote in 1682, the year he came to Pennsylvania. The whole quote is, "Death cannot kill what never dies, nor can spirits ever be divided that love and live. If absence be not death, neither is theirs. Death is but crossing the world, as friends do the seas. They live in one another still." Violet Oakley's spirit lives on in these paintings and in us. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Andy, I cannot thank you enough for gracing us with your presence and with this beautiful lecture. You've brought the murals to life, and I know that people may want to ask you questions after at the reception, so I do hope people will stay.
Thank you.
Here is a small token of our appreciation. Wow. One of my greatest memories as a Supreme Court Justice will always be the day I called Andy Masich and asked him if he would give this lecture, and he said yes. Oh. So thank you.
Thank you.
So
thank
much.
you all.
We will hear in a moment from PBA President Sarah Austin. I wanted to invite people at the close of this program to feel free to walk around our glorious courtroom and take a closer look at these majestic murals. You're welcome to do that. We do have security here to keep an eye on you. And also, the book that was referenced earlier by Senator Gortner, The Sacred Challenge, is available to purchase from our museum, and you can certainly sign up over there if you'd like to have a copy of the book. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Masich. And let me turn the closing of the program over to our PBA President, Sarah Austin.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Justice Todd, for your earlier kind introduction, and thank you for spearheading this program. I think being here has absolutely reminded us all to be inspired in everything that we do. Chief Justice Saylor, Speaker Turzai, who obviously had to leave a little bit ago, Representative Gordner, esteemed justices and judges, legislators, colleagues, and friends. The Pennsylvania Bar Association is honored to join with the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania in sponsoring this evening's program. Change can happen in the streets, at the ballot box, or in a Supreme Court courtroom such as this, but it can also be sparked by a performance in a theater or even by a painting. While there are many effective tools to achieve justice, responsible laws, vigorous advocacy, fair and impartial courts, often it is an image or a story that draws you in. As Dr. Masich so eloquently explained, Violet Oakley's complex murals illustrate just how closely the arts and the law can be intertwined. They inspire justice and change. The law, in Ms. Oakley's eye, was designed to remain fluid and flexible to respond to the ever-changing needs of society and the struggles of the human condition. As we follow the evolution of the law in the murals surrounding us, we realize that this talented artist also led us on a journey of enlightenment as she illustrated her belief that the law is paramount to the advancement of world peace and human rights. Violet Oakley sought to give voice to the people most affected. Ms. Oakley's superior talent, her spirited advocacy, and her belief in the importance of the law and justice remain with us and with every Pennsylvanian who enters this magnificent courtroom. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, I thank you for attending this special event, and we wish you a good evening. Thank you.